Hello everyone and welcome back to part 2 of this series on light metering. As I mentioned in part 1, light metering is one of the most crucial concepts to understand, and when I'm out in the field with my guests, it's definitely responsible for many missed opportunities because of photographers shying away from it or just not knowing about it and how much it influences their photographs. In this video, I'll be delving deeper into the most common metering modes and how it applies practically to your wildlife photography. I'll also be telling you which is my go-to mode and why I prefer not using the others. If you've missed part 1, watch it here before coming back to this video. I've kept the video short to make it easier for you to take it all in. For those who don't know me, I'm Danielle. I'm a professional wildlife photographer and a photo safari leader in Africa from Africa, and I lead photo safaris throughout Africa, making my guests better photographers. In part 1, I spoke about the how of light metering, how the camera reads light and how it decides on a good exposure, a photo that's not too bright and not too dark. Now let's apply this to your camera. Remember that each brand has its own metering modes. Some have metering modes that others don't have. And if they have the same metering mode, it will still differ slightly when it comes to the finer details. In essence though, the concepts remain the same across brands. These are the most common metering modes on most camera brands. First up, evaluative metering, also called matrix, digital ESP, multi, depending on the brand that you use. The camera divides the frame into multiple areas, measuring light from all of these areas in order to create an image closely resembling what is seen by the naked eye. In essence, it reads light from all over the scene and forms an exposure based on this. Certain brands tend to prioritize or give more weighting to a particular area of the frame, often the focus area, when metering the light, and you'll be able to see this in your camera manual. Let's have a look at a few examples. Here it was early morning, before sunrise and still very dark. I'm using a mirrorless camera here. Now notice how the sky influences the chosen exposure of the camera here. If I include more sky in the frame, the camera reads that there's, say, 80% bright light, and it decreases the exposure to compensate for that and to keep the meter at 0. Remember, it's aiming to create an average. If I include more dark areas, dark foreground, the camera will adjust the exposure to compensate for that and make the photo lighter as a whole. By the way, this is one significant advantage of using a mirrorless camera, the live exposure. It constantly meters the light and you see the effect of your composition on your exposure in real time. The important thing to note here is that your composition makes all the difference. Often when I'm on safari, my guests ask me which settings they should use at a specific sighting in terms of exposure, and it's really hard to tell because one guest might have the frame filled with a dark subject zoomed in all the way, and the other guest might be going for an environmental or habitat photo where the sky or the bright grass occupies most of the frame. The same applies for this scene, a dark bird on a light background. When the majority of the frame is taken up by the sky, the bird is really dark and very little detail is visible in its feathers. But when zooming in and filling a larger area of the frame with the dark subject, the camera again tries to create an average exposure, making the dark bird lighter. You can see the ISO increases as it does so. You'll notice it specifically as I focus on the bird. Remember that this metering mode usually gives more preference to the focused area. As a last example, I'll use this photo of a crocodile. I didn't change any settings between these two photographs, and I was using manual with auto ISO. I only changed the composition. In this photo, the majority of the frame is taken up by very bright water, and in this one, I changed the composition and included mostly dark water or shade in the frame. See how the camera compensates for the mostly dark scene by making the photo brighter. Notice how high the auto ISO goes in order to lighten up the photograph. Also, see how the camera decreases the exposure in the bright photo to try and even out the overall exposure. And notice how much lower the ISO is due to all the brightness. Try to remember these examples as references when you're out in the field busy taking your own photographs. And as always, remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to stay up to date with our latest video releases. And then we get to spot metering. Most brands have this one in common, but each differs slightly in operation, as I mentioned. Very important to note, spot metering is not to be confused with spot focus, as Canon calls it, i.e. single point focus. This is such a common mistake I see photographers making. Metering and focus are two completely different things, and the word spot does make it quite confusing. Spot metering has the camera reading the light from a very small area, about 1 to 3% of the frame, either around the center of the frame or linked to an autofocus point, depending on the camera brand and the setup. It's a good idea to check your camera manual, as I've mentioned. In other words, it only takes into account a tiny bit of light, and it bases the total exposure on just the light from that small little area. Let's look at an example. This yellow-billed duck has some bright highlights on parts of it and some shadows on others. When you're using spot metering, the exposure is drastically influenced by the placement of your metering point. See how the exposure changes depending on the placement. The camera reads light only from the small area in the center and decides on an average exposure of the whole scene based purely on that small area. The third metering mode I'd like to mention is center-weighted metering. This is also one that most brands have in common. In a nutshell, the camera measures the average brightness of the entire screen while emphasizing the central area more. You can actually see how the camera changed exposure after the bright duck left the center of the frame here, and it was left to meter off the dark water instead. Some photographers use this mode in conjunction with exposure lock, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Lastly, highlight metering. This mode measures brightness while emphasizing the highlighted areas on the screen in order to avoid overexposure, so it saves your highlights. This would apply to scenes with a lot of bright areas like snow or sky or bright water. Not all cameras have this metering mode available, but if your camera does, play around with it and see how it affects your photographs. Hopefully I can delve deeper into brand-specific metering modes in a future video. Right, now I'll be telling you which metering mode I prefer to use and why not the others. Let's talk about center-weighted metering first. In wildlife, we don't often place subjects in the middle of the frame, and therefore this mode isn't applicable to wildlife photography in my opinion. For portraiture, sure, but not for wildlife. Especially if you have a preference for minimalism, like I do. You'll often be metering the sky with the subject far away from center. As mentioned earlier, you can use this mode in conjunction with exposure lock, but in my opinion, there's an easier way for wildlife photography. Then on to spot metering. To demonstrate my point, let's use a fish eagle as an example. The fish eagle takes off from its perch, and you're thrilled to have caught it in the frame. When you review your photographs, you see that one photo looks like this and the next one looks like this. Why? Because in this photo, the camera metered from this area, exposing only for a dark spot. And in this photo, it took the light reading from this area, exposing only for the white. Remember the example I used earlier on the yellow-billed ducks? One moment, the exposure is bright when the focus point falls on the dark part. The next moment, the exposure changes when the point falls on the brighter area. Now in this case, the duck isn't moving fast and you'll be able to control your focus point placement. But that's definitely not the case with birds in flight or fast-moving wildlife in general. So even if you are able to link your focus point and your metering area, It's not a guarantee that you'll be able to place it perfectly for each frame. It's not even only about two-toned subjects like fish eagles. It might just be that the subject has shade as well as sun on it, like we saw with the yellow-billed duck. This inconsistency is the reason for my dislike of spot metering. In wildlife photography, we're photographing in the shade one moment and the next moment in bright sunlight. We're also often photographing two-toned subjects like fish eagles, zebras, pied kingfishers, African jacanas. Things happen fast and precision isn't always possible, so spot metering is out for me. I'm not saying it's wrong, and you might be so in tune with spot metering on your camera that you're able to predict the outcome well enough, but personally I don't make use of it for wildlife. Let me know in the comments whether you do like using spot metering and why. That leaves us with evaluative metering. This is my preferred metering mode for wildlife photography. I find it works best for me and I make use of exposure compensation coupled with this mode to get the results I'm after and expose for my subject. Exposure compensation is one of the most powerful settings to master if you're looking to increase your keeper rate and get creative with your photography. I've come to know my camera very well and I know how it performs in different scenarios and different lighting conditions. As I mentioned before, a mirrorless camera shows you your live exposure, so you're already able to preview your image before you take the photograph, or preview at least your exposure, making it easy to decide on how much exposure compensation to use. Here are a few before and after photos in which I used evaluative metering coupled together with exposure compensation. After many hours in the field testing and trying different methods, I still prefer using evaluative metering together with exposure compensation. Just because I prefer evaluative metering doesn't mean that you are wrong if you don't. It comes down to really knowing how your camera reads light and knowing how it reacts to that. I hope this video gave you a better understanding of light metering in your camera and how you can use it to your advantage, especially by being able to predict what the camera is going to do and how you can be prepared for any lighting scenario. There is much more where this content came from, so please make sure you subscribe and we'll see you soon in the next video. Until then, keep well, bye-bye.